Friends, family, and cohorts, welcome back to the Fight or Flight podcast. Today's guest is a master storyteller, a narrative director, and SAG-AFTRA performer whose films span genres from action to surrealism, drama to comedy. Born in Buffalo, New York, and we won't hold that against him, Ryan has spent a career making films since he was a young child, traveling the world from Atlanta to Berlin, crafting images that don't just tell stories, but make you think, make you pause, and make you feel. Ryan is a member of The Right Collective, a creative director and partner, and this is a creative force located in Atlanta, fueled by curiosity and playful energy that breathes life into every film and initiative. Today is Ryan's story and his fight or flight venture. And as always, we're going to dive deep, not for spectacle, but for the truth and the lessons learned. Brother Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be on the pod. Very exciting.
Yeah, I got to thank you for rocking the JV skull too, man. It looks dope on you. All right, brother. So let's just jump right into it. Ryan, you've described yourself as a filmmaker driven by curiosity and deep connection to your subjects. For listeners who don't know you, tell us, who is Ryan and what does your life's work mean to you?
Sure. I guess I'd started by saying I'm from a very small town, Buffalo, New York, but amongst a community of really great people that taught me a lot about listening to the people around you from a very young age. That's one thing I love. Anytime I go back to Buffalo, not that anybody will let you know that they don't have a story. They love to talk your ear off, but I learned to really listen to people from a young age. But as soon as I left home, I left home at 17 years old, went to the University of Buffalo, eventually started doing some graduate programs and went into the workforce in the film industry. I really realized that the connecting thread of everything that I was interested in was story. I was writing books since I was a young kid. I will not take credit, but I did write the 5th Harry Potter book before J.K. Rowling, mainly illustrations, 120 pages in the 3rd grade. But I always had this kind of running imagination, and I always knew I liked talking to people, learning people's stories. That was my big thread. I did contact in sports martial arts pretty much my entire life growing up. I fought in the United States sports martial arts team and actually won a world championship in the 15 to 18 division right by the end of high school. So that was hugely formative. So I basically had this kind of militant, very strict sense of discipline. I loved talking and learning from people, and I had a very vivid imagination. Going into college, I was the first person in my primary family to go to college. And there's this big question of how I would apply these skills in a way that makes sense, how I can really leverage my abilities to the world. And I was a sciences guy. I originally was going to go to school for biomedical engineering. My sister went to school for pharmacy. That was the safe track. Where I'm from, working in the film industry is essentially paramount to working as an astronaut. Nobody knows anybody who knows anybody who knows anybody works in the film industry, right? But I decided that I could kind of run a split career where I could focus on performing. And that led to me joining the Screen Actors Guild back in 2014 and teaching actors and stunt people how to do weapons and fight movement for film. So as I first started getting into the industry, I started teaching people how to perform some of the, if you've ever seen the first Daredevil Netflix series or, a lot of these old school now, this is 2014, Marvel shows that came out on Netflix, there was this huge boom of people wanting to learn Filipino martial arts, weapons martial arts. That got me into that side of the business. Worked with a lot of actors, taught at the Actor Studio, SCAD Film, the Toronto International Film Festival, etc. But I've always had this beating drum of how to connect and tell people's stories running at the same time. So while in college, I did a feature documentary project in conjunction with the Brain Injury Association of America that chronicled what is still considered to be a bit of a miracle recovery case for a young man from Western New York who was killed in a car accident and resuscitated 15 times on his way to the hospital, declared brain dead, and ended up walking out the door 100 days later. I spent 4 years of my life working on that documentary. And then this all threaded into starting to make narrative films off the back of the documentary work, which I still do some. I really love, real nonfiction stories. But to me, all this to be said, story is the Trojan horse for meaning, for connecting, for really trying to convey things in a time when people don't like being told how to feel. So my work over the last 10 years has really been focused on using some traditional filmmaking techniques, also a lot of film technology, but also combining genres in interesting ways. For instance, we did a bunch of puppetry films that involved people and puppets, but they were adult-leaning dramas. A lot of the action work I've done has involved robotics and virtual production technology. So always just trying to take a bit of a different stilt towards something. Getting ready to direct my first film that'll be in theaters at Q1 of 2026. That'll be exciting, called Grifters, an action heist comedy movie. And again, all of the work is just trying to look at the world from a unique perspective, infuse film technology, but also bring in this everydayness that I think is sometimes missing from the film space. Everything tends to be a bit glossy. And I like just bringing out the stories of real people we can look at and relate to. So.
Yeah, you've got a lot of grain and character to draw upon. I'm quite curious. So you were LA based and you're now Atlanta based, correct?
I was actually New York based and
Excuse me,
now
New
Atlanta
York.
based. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Okay. So recognizing that, I'm really curious about that moment where that seminal time where you said, holy cow, what's next? And what keeps coming to my mind, Ryan, is the starving artist, the creator, the dreamer, the doer that's always leaning into it, that's always struggling to get their content monetized and get it to a point where there's enough inertia that it takes care of itself. And I'm curious because we've got a lot of friends and listeners that are in the creative space that are either trying to launch their own initiative and or are in an agency that they're trying to elevate even faster. Was there a moment where you thought, is this dream going to end? Or where you had to have a hard pivot instead of soldiering forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's been a couple. As is probably the life of any artist, there's been a few, and I'll just briefly touch on a few. One was right after college. I was working at a production company, Digital Lose, up in New York. I was starting to get some commercial work, working on that side of the business, and I had a track that I could follow that way. And this is really I think the crossroads most young artists, entrepreneurs face is, do I just do the safe thing where I know I can make money? Or do I pursue something that's an absolute risk that I have no idea how it's going to go out? I've always been a man who chooses adventure. As a stuntman, I've jumped out of planes on fire and done motorcycle chases and anything you might name. So I've always liked to push it. So my first big what comes next moment was when I came to Atlanta in 2014 with a couple $100 in my pocket and nowhere to live, on the whim that there was film happening in town. In fact, it was really interesting because I relate the early 2010s Atlanta to the gold rush. You had people coming from all over the country, from New York, Los Angeles, Florida, the Carolinas. New Orleans had just lost its tax incentive. So suddenly there were people just showing up with no relationships, nobody knowing anybody, nobody having a job opportunity and deciding they're going to try to make it here. And I ended up running into a bunch of young makers at that time who are still professionals that I work with to this day. But I was a massive risk. I was sleeping in the car when I first got to Atlanta to figure out what the next step was. But that really forced me to be innovative. And I think scarcity forces innovation. And if art is ever existing out of the space of having to be innovative, then is it really art?
Well said. Very challenging not to have a safety net or a clear path on how it's going to take off. And the industry is known for being particularly unpredictable and oftentimes brutal. Was there a particular lesson learned or a punch to the gut during this process where you said, hey, this is the kernel of truth, the most valuable thing that I can take from that experience that's gotten you to where you are right now?
Yeah. So specifically, film and entertainment is very much a momentum-based industry. I don't know if you can measure it, but it seems to be when you're working and moving, when something you're doing is hot, when you're riding the wave of a film festival, when you're meeting new contacts, everything kind of forces this momentum push towards making the next biggest thing. Sometimes people who take a year or 3 years out of the industry have a really hard time building that momentum back. Well, what did we have during 2020? You want to talk about a discouraging moment? We had 6-7 years of momentum to building a feature science fiction film featuring Native Americans, the Osage tribe, that we had raised without getting specifics, many millions of dollars in a match fund for. We had closed this deal at the top of March 2020. And we all know what happened by mid-March 2020. Essentially, all mid-tier theatrical movies just went away. So within a very short amount of time, we went from a space where Atlanta was a boom town, where there was a lot of production happening, and the company I work with, we're getting ready to make our first big feature that would be in theaters, had raised the money to then that company that had invested in us collapsed and went away. Nobody was making movies at all. And now it became increasingly harder for anybody to break in. That continued through the writer strike and the SAG-AFTRA strike in the 2023 era. And now so much of our labor has offshored. It's become increasingly difficult to make things here. But my focus has been two things. Innovate, don't emulate. Constantly in the indie film world, people are trying to emulate content that's at a higher scale. So, people come into a pitch room and say, hey, imagine this is Fast and the Furious meets the Smurfs. I'll give you a random example, right? And not that we don't use those analogs in pitching, but I've always tried to think about how can we do something that's different than these $100, $200 million movies at the $5 to $25 million scale. That's been our big focus. So how do we innovate in the space, not just try to do what the big studios are doing? And then secondly, I learned this from a very young age from a mentor, Tom Swanson, great businessman in his own right. He's actually been involved with our Grub project for years. If opportunity doesn't knock, you got to build a door. In the industry specifically, but artists can relate to this across spectrum, singers, writers. There's this pick me mentality. Everybody's pick me. And you're amongst hundreds and thousands, I mean, literally tens of thousands of people vying for one job or one opportunity. And you're constantly trying to get chosen to do the job. What we took a different approach with is we built the value up front. Meaning that instead of just writing a script and going away and saying, hey, would you please maybe do my movie, please, sir? Our focus was, okay, hey, let's actually develop the IP ourselves, run focus and test groups, create some of the creatures. We've actually built scale models that stand 10, 13 feet tall of some of the characters in our movies, and deeply, deeply develop the property so we can come with leverage when we come to go raise money for movies. And that's what we've done, and it's been quite successful, and excited to share that first movie.
Yeah. I want to come back to that for a moment, but I'd like to lean back into creating momentum because there are a lot of people that have had momentum, great career path, and all of a sudden they're layoffs and they're displaced, or a great career path and they're not happy. So they want to pursue that, which makes them extremely satisfied, value add. How do you create that value and that momentum when it's capital intensive and you're at a standstill? Or like you were explaining, COVID had a hit, because to create the scale and the content and push that forward, that's a capital requirement that many people may be struggling to get to. So I'm quite curious about, I'm at a stalemate and I want to recreate that energy and that excitement, that momentum.
Yeah, if we could capture that as lightning in a bottle, it would sell for an infinite amount of money. And it's hard to put a figure to it, but my approach and the approach of a lot of my contemporaries at Wright, and that I'm working with on these film projects, has been keeping the end goal in mind, but not just the means to get to the end goal rigid. So, for instance, we were working on the science fiction Odyssey project. Film's called Grob, and that budget sat around like $60-ish million. We had a bunch of big plays. We were meeting with MPC Technicolor. We had just raised all this money. Pandemic hit. Instead of focusing on that project, we created a new project that was a little bit more bite-sized and fit for streaming, and then tried to apply all that same leverage in that direction, which was great because that now sits at the back of our slate and it's moving now all these years later. So I think sometimes in the momentum business, people get fixed on one, if you're leading a war, it's not about the lead horse, right? It's about, the entire army trying to get through. And sometimes people are so focused on that lead horse, their first thing to market, that they don't pivot when they need to pivot. And that the thing to market can be you. I've had to rebrand myself at times. I mean, at first I never imagined doing stunts as a career avenue. At this point, I've done everything from Spider-Man to The Walking Dead. It's got me into stunt coordination and second unit directing, which has expanded my opportunities to direct content. So just really being flexible about where you're trying to go and realizing what proper goal setting of what that North Star is. For me, I had to sit back and think, is the North Star making this one movie, or is it trying to make content at scale that feels authentic to me? And that's been my approach.
You and Paris and your group have impressed me as ones that can reimagine what a better future looks like and can see around corners. How does that come about? Where do you get that talent? And I know you're leveraging technology and you're always bringing forward solutions that aren't commonplace. So where does the inspiration come from and how do you go about pulling that forward?
Yeah. So when the Hollywood system was really churning in Atlanta, it started around like 2013, 2014. Marvel came to Atlanta, right? So all of a sudden we had all the biggest movies shooting here, and then that spun into Marvel TV shows, and we had so many procedural shows shooting here too. Our real focus was how we could be a solution to problems production were running into. We've always tried to be solutions forward. Myself as a director and producer, but also Wright Media. Stands for Wright is True Expression. And our focus was, okay, hey, how do we carve out a niche for ourselves and also solve very real problems? Well, we knew that there was this new robotics technology coming to film along with high-speed cameras. We decided, okay, hey, there's not a huge market share for this right now, but if we invest early and become the experts in something, we can then use that to leverage our way onto these bigger and bigger shows. And that's exactly what happened. Before I was at the company, right, kit bashed a General Motors robot and literally like reworked this car assembly robot to run and fly cameras. Once we proved that we could make really cool, interesting cinematic shots with it, that spun into us getting a whole fleet of robots running high speed and robotics for basically any major Marvel movie or TV show that's shot in Atlanta. Actually, it's fun. In Spider-Man No Way Home, I was performing stunts under a guy named Ben Jenkins and George Cottle. And I was actually doubling the Green Goblin character, and our robot assistants were out there capturing some of that fight. And that was a nice full circle moment for the company. So we really just try to find different innovative ways in. And what technology is to us is it's just the emerging frontier of the technique. At one point, cameras were the technology. At another point, the ballpoint pen was the technology. So our big focus, and right now, AI is something we're really, really focusing on. We have an AI division at our company. And we've focused on, okay, hey, instead of being afraid of this next medium, how do we invest in it, learn more about it, and do it ethically and responsibly? That's been our big push with AI.
Let's lean into that for a minute. What does ethical and responsible AI mean, and how are you deploying it? Because there are a lot of people that are scared of it and a lot of people that are embracing it and writing it, excited for what it's going to be. But the undercurrent is it's going to displace people. It's going to rewrite creativity and imagination and the je ne sais quoi that happens. That serendipity between people is going to evaporate. Is that real?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny is one of my strengths is always like word crafting. I can write a strong email quickly. I can kind of get my point across concisely. The last year I've noticed, man, everybody writes emails so well. And you realize that everybody's talking to each other through a filter, through ChatGPT now. I can't tell you the number of people who I know are communicating by running everything through an AI filter, a large language model, before they do. So yes, it is absolutely going to change the way we interact. And there are things to be afraid of. I don't think it's the equivalence of the atomic bomb. Or maybe if you do want to make that analogy, there's a great potential for destruction, but nuclear energy has totally revitalized the way we create power globally. So for me, AI is not realistically going to replace people entirely, specifically in the arts space, but it will replace people who don't use AI. So our big focus has been from the ground up, learning about, kind of being futurists to a degree, which is, hey, how do we leverage these tools the best? And then to get in your conversation about it, or your question rather, about what is ethical. And there's a lot of ways you can look at what's ethical. Our belief is it still preserves authenticity from the artist, meaning originality, meaning it's a tool to assist in a direction. It's not the one guiding. So for example, I will use it in the writing process in the sense of if I am trying to create a story arc, if I'm focused on a character, a time period, I will use a lot of AI to do research for historical relevance for specific fields, but I'll never use it to guide the actual direction of a story. And that's something we take very seriously. We do a lot of internal brain trusts. And actually, we've been reverse engineering a lot of AI stuff. There are so many scripts we get that are clearly written by AI. You can actually do a lot of reverse engineering on that to pick up on patterns. And I would say half the scripts we've read over the last year have definitely been significantly touched or written by AI. So again, our focus is using the tools to assist in the creative thinking process, but not to replace creative. On the other side is generative. Everybody's very afraid of generative AI because the reality is graphic designers probably are going to be facing something like a massive, less than 5 to 10% of that crew will maintain, I think, in the next few years. But the problem with AI right now is that it's scraping everything on the internet, meaning that it's essentially just copying everything. So there's a big Supreme Court case happening with the US Supreme Court on the value of copyright for AI right now. Our whole purpose has been we create AI models that is trained exclusively on our own content. A LoRa is like a map, a data point set that an AI is trained on. We do not train AI in anything we create on the internet at large. It's all on our own content or all on stuff that we produce ourselves. So it actually just makes our content more efficient instead of referencing everything else at large. And that's, to me, what makes it ethical and that it still comes from us.
Fantastic. So if I'm a business, a consumer products brand, and I want rights, support, or help telling my story or content forward, is that something the agency gets involved with? Or are you specifically storytelling for entertainment and education as it relates to digital and virtual realities?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We span all fields. Some of our biggest partners are people building next generation cities in the Middle East. We're working with some of the folks that are building a new Top Gun theme park. We do a lot of narrative service work. We're coming onto movies and helping them embolden their vision for what they can do and what's possible. But a huge slice of our business is still the branded space. And to me, this is actually the really interesting world because the line between branded and narrative content are progressively merging in some spaces. We saw sponsored content become a thing in 2015, 2016, where you'd actually have short films and commercials that were kind of abstract pieces sponsored by, certain brands. As we continue to move forward, our big focus is delivering clear brand voice for, whatever entity it may be, but also micro targeting that brand voice to talk to their end user better. And I'll give you an example.
Please.
Hyatt Regency. Every time you go into the Hyatt, you turn on the TV. Right now, you see your name up there, and it says, "Hey, Miles." Well, I mean, there's a little typeface, right, that says,
Yeah,
"Miles,
exactly.
welcome. Here's the weather," right? Well, imagine we could now, using responsible AI practices and our production expertise, shoot a video of your hotel grounds, and of somebody walking around representing the hotel, talking to the camera about the different facets of the hotel. But we can use a system we call God Model to get them to say your name, talk about your interests specific to every individual end user. This is micro targeting. This is the future. Content that doesn't just speak to you figuratively, it speaks to you literally. So that's been our big focus, is how we can help brands target who their exact end user is. And a lot of times, advertisement in the past is we put up a billboard and it's about awareness. And there is something about getting into the zeitgeist, but social media has changed this space so much. We need to reach people where they are, which is at an individual personalized level. So our big
So
push now is that.
there was that movie where Tom Cruise walked into a department store and it was like, "Hello," whatever the character's name was. And last time you're here, you purchased this, that, and the other thing. And we'd like to recommend this, 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 and this. And we think that'll look great. And here's your size. And is that
Essentially,
the,
I think it's Minority Report. Is that,
oh, was it Minority
I'm not
Report that did it?
mistaken? Yeah. He's done a lot of sci-fi stuff, but I think
Yeah,
that's it. But yeah, that's the exact idea. But trying to do that at an authentic level that makes it, not just, saying, "Hey, Miles, you want a sweatshirt? I know you do."
sure.
But instead being able to talk to the wants and needs of the person as well. And that's where the future of this is going. Right now, it's micro-targeting based content. But as it continues to evolve, how we interact with content is going to change because it's going to interact back with us. So it's not going to be a passive experience. It's going to increasingly become an active experience. And that's where we're focused for the future.
Very cool. So as you focus that, what markets are you going to monetize and what are you going to go into
Mhm.
first?
Yeah.
Because this is different than receiving entertainment or art. This
Mhm.
is, as you're talking about, hand to hand engagement, very personalization. It's bespoke.
Yeah. So, a great example of where the entertainment industry is starting to hit this, something as silly as like what people are doing with Snapchat filters. But when
Yes.
you're on there, you're actually getting to like turn into the character and then you can do recordings and it changes your voice. Those are great examples of getting people pulled into the brand at a very micro, or the content on a very micro level. Also, now some of the biggest hits in the show business have turned into live immersive experiences. The Stranger Things experience has been touring the country, and people can go in and go face to face and become a part of the whole Stranger Things family. This new Paramount Top Gun theme park that's coming about is going to have a bunch of immersive experiences where you can go in and talk to, really participate in the IP in an original way. So, to answer your question, what's first? I don't think there's one springboard. It's just as problems come in, we try to solve them with this new possible solution. All of the IP that we're creating, this new film that we're creating, we are creating interactive assets along the way. So our goal when you go to a movie theater is to be able to eventually have the equivalence of a Disneyland experience, but down the street for 25 to 30 bucks, which is I can go watch the movie and then I can use an AR element in the lobby, whether it be Google Glass or some kind of apparatus, and actually see and interact with characters from the screen into my personal environment, letting that IP be a part of how people live their lives, if that makes sense.
How far out are we from seeing this actual come to reality?
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking, some of this is very future minded. This is where it's
Yeah.
going. It doesn't mean where it is now. But the ability to have augmented reality elements where characters talk to you directly is already there. It's already happening. And in fact, what's funny is a lot of this tech has existed in the VR space for some time, but we've been limited on processing power and limited on how people can actually leverage these tools in real time. So as we continue to get greater access and everybody has a pocket AI, wearable tech is going to be another big part of that future. That's a whole nother conversation.
But these are things that Right Media and your organization, the integrated group that you have, is thinking about. You're contemplating these and you're bringing
Correct.
solutions forward
Absolutely.
and you're sequencing them where you're doing things for today, midterm, long term.
Yep,
So that's part of you and your group reimagining the future. So
absolutely.
someone listening to this, if I'm a retailer, i.e. a Lululemon or
Hmm.
an Aloe Yoga, and I want to create a virtual studio,
Hmm.
so when I walk into the store, I can see myself in a pose or in a workout. This is beyond just AR, VR glasses. As you
Hmm.
said, this is interactive. So you're the engagement. So they would come to you as the engineering and the creative solution providers. Did I understand that?
Yeah, so I operate with Right as the chief creative officer. So I'm often working with our technology team to set goals and go after them.
Got it.
We've got a great head of production. Paris Schulman, our CEO, has done a lot of work for a long time to make sure we are merging creative and technology authentically. But we are coming in as full consults from the ground up. A lot of times we're actually doing consultation work before we ever make anything, just to help guide people on track of what the future actually might look like. Because a lot of times the market is responsive, not proactive, it's reactive, right? So you're a bit behind the ball if you are trying to recreate content that's interactive or that's going to function for AI maybe years from now or even right now. Our whole focus is to how can we, as we do any shoot, let's say we go do a shoot for Shaquille O'Neal, right?
Right.
How can I take that set, digitize that set, and capture certain assets there so that they are future proofed to be leveraged for an array of applications down the line? We could scan Shaq, have an agreement with him that his model is going to be licensed in the future, and then be able to use him in a video game that we're building down the line. Have him pull up in a filter. Have Shaq talk directly to you. This is all stuff that's possible now, and this is the
Yeah.
really exciting part of this: is just getting ahead of where the market's going to have the real novel experiences.
Man, remarkable. This is really exciting. I
Yes.
appreciate what you guys are doing. And, I feel the energy and I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
Let's pivot for a moment because you and I had a brief chat about some personal trials and tribulations with regards to a fire and some other personal experiences that you had that were testing really hard.
Mm.
Can you share what that was, the most pronounced one, and what happened? And let's get into that because I think that's got a lot to do with a fight or a flight as well.
Hmm. Yeah. I've had a bunch of, I've always been somebody who pushes the limits on adventure. I have, I wish I actually had the photos to share with you today. I was on the Norwegian newspaper because I got stranded in a mountain in the Arctic Circle and had to get helicopter evacuated out. Me and my good friend, who's a stunt guy, survived getting mugged at knife point. It turned into a whole thing when we were in Turkey. Um, we've just been an array of crazy,
Wow.
went snow blind climbing a mountain. There's just been a lot of
Oh, shit.
pushing to the human limits where possible. And I've always found that to be an intrinsic part of being a storyteller. It makes me a better, don't tell my girlfriend this, but it makes me a better storyteller to sometimes push those boundaries and know where the upper limit is when you knock on the ceiling. But there has been,
So does that make you an adrenaline junkie?
yeah, one could describe me as an adrenaline. I think fighting in martial arts gave that to me to a degree, and I've always been kind of pushing the limit of what's out there. I try to
All
do it
right.
responsibly, safely as I can, but no
I
adventure is
appreciate
truly
it.
safe if it's an adventure.
Well, sure, because you're launching yourself into the unknown, and
Right,
with the unknown comes
right.
the risk, and what we're talking about is the uncertainty of
Hmm.
is there a next?
Of course. And then even the tiny pivot off that is how people travel today really does bother me. And that people are usually traveling in a simulated tourist experience, but they're never interacting with the culture itself.
Oh, lean into that for a minute. What do you mean by
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. So I've spent a lot of time, years of my life living abroad, Bulgaria, Berlin, did a show in the Dominican Republic, but also just for my own life, my own spiritual experience. I've been to 40 plus countries now. And a lot of the tourist industry is a put on simulation of a version of the local culture meant to be digestible for quick turn and churn participants. You go to Egypt and you're being sold like little plastic Egyptian statues from China while you are eating at a McDonald's, right? You're not really experiencing Egypt. You're experiencing this like caricature of the culture. And I've always found that to be a very irresponsible way to travel. I wanted to go out there and get thrust into it and live with the people. I've knocked on doors in Nicaragua and asked if I could sleep on the floor with people in their shack. And I slept next to a grandpa and a young boy in a shack in Nicaragua. I stayed in the slums when I was in India. I think it's an important part for me, at least as a storyteller, as a person who wants to convey the human experience, to really understand what's going on in different places of the world. And that's something I'm very passionate about and that drives me.
Yeah, the immersion opposed to the just spectating, and that's what I appreciate about you. And it's more than just surface level. It's not fluff. There's some substance, and you can support it. So I appreciate that
Yeah, so
in the
many
sense
things
of
are
what you're
fluff when
doing.
you poke a hole in them these days.
Yeah, right, right, exactly. Because there are a lot of posers and there are a lot of false
Mhm.
proxies out there and people that claim to have done this, that, and the other thing, but they have, but they haven't because there's not a lot of grain and grit. I hate that word, but a lot of it behind the actual experience. But to the earlier question, where was that pain point or that
Yep, yep.
personal, what the fuck just happened and why is this happening to me? Not snow blinding, not the physical pain, but the the circumstance that slapped you like, yo, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, there's really two.
Yeah.
The COVID and strike situation made it so that we had gone very far down the line after a near decade of work, and then the industry evaporated. That felt like, man, you see all these talent. I mean, I was watching my neighbors lose their houses. I was watching people literally sleeping in their cars because they couldn't afford their rent. I mean, we went from a boom town to like a ghost town. And Atlanta is coming back, and I'm very excited to be a part of that community. But there's been a lot of major setbacks in the film industry there's no historical precedent for this. The entertainment industry has basically been churning content since Thomas Edison was cranking the camera, and we've now run into a point where the future of that is entirely uncertain. But it focuses you to pivot, and that's fine. The other personal thing I'll mention is I had a house fire about a year back.
Yes.
It was in July 5th of 2024.
What caused that?
It was a spontaneous explosion of a lithium ion battery. So I will say to anybody
Come on.
listening to this, if you have a big lithium ion battery in your house, it's worth storing it in a fire blanket or on somewhere with concrete floors, because this blew up, burned at 6 to 7,000 degrees, and the entire house was ablaze within a matter of minutes. I was asleep in the house with my partner and thought somebody was robbing our house to come out, stuntman guns blazing to, oh shit, it's a fire. So it was a very,
Yeah, yeah.
I woke up believing my house was being robbed because I heard crashes and bangs and pows. And I'm like, oh my God, we're being robbed. I have my girlfriend here. I got to protect her, to suddenly open my door to floor to ceiling to walls, a raging inferno. Um, and ended up getting her safely out of the house. I ended up running back into the house because I had some people staying at the house and they were upstairs. And my father's a volunteer firefighter. I was worried that they had passed out from smoke inhalation. And it's the real deal, man. I took maybe 2-3 breaths on my way up to check the bedrooms and I went out. So I ended up collapsing up on the second floor and just passed out from the smoke inhalation and was passed out for a couple of minutes. And by the grace of God, I came to my senses and I was able to crawl my way back to my feet. It was a full blackout at this point. Ended up crawling into the bedroom, seeing that there was nobody in the bedrooms, going to run out of the house, full blackout, slipped and missed the stairs, collapsed down to the bottom, cracked some stuff in my back. I had burned my throat pretty badly. And I basically hit a point where everything I own was gone for the most
Yeah.
part,
I'm sorry.
and didn't have a home. And
Insurance?
you are never as insured as you think you are. That's the
Yeah.
big lesson that
I've
I
heard
learned from
that.
this whole thing. Your kitchen alone, how much value is in your kitchen of appliances and spices and food. And I digress that it was just I speak for a living. I was unable to speak. I was unable to do stunts for a few months from the injury that I sustained. And I had nowhere to go. So, I mean, I had places and people, great network that I appreciate, but I no longer had, it's just very weird to be in a place where you just don't have a home and you don't have
Yeah.
any stuff. It's very challenging to be in that kind of a space. But I will say a lot of my life and adventuring kind of prepared myself for it. And
Hold up. Let's back up to that. What was that like? You're in this seminal moment
mm,
of freedom in you're not encumbered by anything, but there's massive stress of
mhm,
all these possessions are gone. But was it
mhm.
liberating or was it debilitating?
I feel like that fire was incredibly necessary to move on to the next step of my life.
Wow.
And I got some advice from a very smart sage when I was in India, from a man who told me if you could start by blaming yourself for everything that happens in your life, start by pointing the finger here, no matter what it is, you're going to have a lot more release and not having bitterness towards the world. So I treated the fire like it was my fault and my problem. And by that, I mean, I wasn't beating myself like, Ryan, why'd you start this fire? What I did was like, wow, hey, I could have learned more about lithium ion batteries and, and not had that be in this space. And also to be grateful. If you're alive, if your heart is beating, you should be grateful for whatever the outcome is, because we get to be a part of this grand orchestra that is life. So I got to live. And I got another great story out of it. So I picked myself up by my bootstraps, and we dug the house out for weeks. Everything was largely burned or waterlogged or smowed out, and rebuilt. And I'm now in a place that I purchased and have more or less rebuilt from the ground up. A new kind of artist lounge here in Atlanta that I'm very proud of. So
Yeah, it looks super dope.
it's pretty cool. I can't wait to have you by. It's an
Yeah,
exciting
no, I
spot.
appreciate it. I'm coming by.
It's an
I want
exciting
that.
spot. But really, I think as a storyteller, you realize that the villain and the hero role is all about framing. Somebody could be either of those depending on how you want to look at the story, is what I mean. There is a version of events where people we traditionally look at as villains are the heroes, because everybody has to be the hero in their own story. So the same thing with any hardship is that, you got to kind of grit into it and be willing to tell yourself the narrative upside of your circumstance. And that's
Let's lean into the villain and the hero for a second. Where does vulnerability fit into that equation?
Man, I mean, a whole lot of therapy and coming to terms with intergenerational trauma. So, I come from a very immigrant-minded family where everything's very like knuckle it and don't talk about it. And whether talking to somebody else about your problems is the thing you want to do, you at a very minimum need to have an honest conversation with yourself about it. Because positioning ourselves as the hero at all time can be a massive blind spot, both in career space and in personal life. It's very easy to have the ego sense of like what I do is justified because it feels like the right thing to me. But having a very healthy internal dialogue, journaling helps me with that a lot. I write stories and poetry about things happening in my life, and suddenly you can kind of get a bit of a distanced look at what you're going through, and it doesn't feel so skewed by
Yeah, for
emotion.
sure.
You can be a bit objective. So yeah, hero or villain. I mean, I've lived my whole life by these ideas. Growing up on Lord of the Rings, I've always wanted to be the hero of my own story, but I think there's a lot more grayness to life, and all we can do is try to do our best and frame stories the best that benefit us.
So was there no fear or doubt coming out of the fire of, can I survive? I'm on my own. Was there sort of a moment where you're like, shit, I don't know if I can make it through this? Or is it more of a fight mechanism when you've been so trained in martial arts and in imaginative play that you were able to vision a better tomorrow, so you were able to constantly move forward?
Yeah, it's a really interesting way of putting it. I guess I got to pay you for therapy now. The the two things that I hold on to that I think are relevant is that I have a very elastic imagination. So it's not hard for me to imagine something getting better. Whereas I think sometimes people are very stuck in their present moment. Things I've worked on over the years too. I mean, of course, I'm subject to it as well. But the other side is I grew up in a martial arts environment where everything is very incremental progress. You check one box, you check one box, you get a little bit better, you get a little bit better. It's not about becoming overnight the best. Things don't typically work that way. It's about, hey, what do I have in my control that I can solve today? Maybe I can pick my hand up a little bit in my stance. Maybe I can turn my crossover a little bit deeper. Maybe I can tuck my chin a little bit more during a fight. I try to apply that to life. What are the little incremental steps that I can measure today that will make me better? And where do I want to use my imagination to know where this is all going? Because unless you have a good imagination of how things can be, those little incremental steps can feel like you're a slave to something. I find this a lot of times in students of mine. They really have to spend some time to imagine where they want to go before they start doing just a little incremental work all the time.
Well, what impresses me is an ability to stay present in the moment while at the same time understanding what the end goal is, or what they might say is a desired state. So I appreciate that dichotomy of stay present, stay thankful, stay incrementally strong, but I know where I'm going with this, opposed to being completely arrested,
Right.
And locked down. This has been remarkable. The advice that you've given both on a creative side and to fighters, and people going through trials and tribulations, they still stuck in their own moments. Those crossroads where things feel uncertain, super clear. I think you dropped some really great knowledge, personal and professional. What I'd like to do now is pivot and go into a rapid fire with you.
Let's do it. I love it.
I'd like to hit you with a question.
I'm a man of rapid fires. Let's do it.
Knock
Hopefully
them
no more
down.
fires.
Literally, right? Sorry about that. No pun intended. What's your go-to creative fuel?
Interacting with people in a genuine way.
What's your biggest fear in filmmaking?
Never letting commercialism overtake the message the story is trying to tell.
One word that defines resilience?
Focus.
Favorite film genre?
This is maybe the hardest one. Let's say fantasy.
One word for your storytelling style.
Innovative.
Toughest lesson learned.
You are responsible for everything that happens to you in your own life.
Morning routine must have.
Deep breathing and a cold shower.
What keeps you fighting?
Love.
Discipline or motivation?
They're the same thing.
Outstanding. This has been a blast, man. I really appreciated this conversation. Your story's moving. If anyone wants to get dialed into what you're doing and your team, Paris and the crew, how do they find you? What's the best way to receive an inquiry, a speaking opportunity,
Sure.
you know,
I'm pretty uh,
consultation?
I'm pretty active on my social channels. So on Instagram, I'm just instagram.com/ handle is Ryan, RYAN .MONO. And you can keep up with adventures of us doubling actors around the world and big fight scenes, producing content using robotics and what the next big thing is for us. So that's the easiest way. LinkedIn as well. Same thing, Ryan Mono.
Fantastic. And we'll include all that in the show notes. This has been amazing. I really appreciated your time. Thank you for spending it with us today, learning more about the creative process of filmmaking, imagining a better tomorrow, as well as the personal challenges that have forced you to redefine and understand what I call courage and resilience. Been remarkable. I'm super grateful to have you in my circle.
Miles,
Uh,
feeling similar. Feel like we're
yeah,
brothers from another mother already. So
100%. I want to go deep on the ink that you got, learn a little bit more
talk
about
about the
that.
stories. I mean, literally, story is so meaningful for me that I have made an act to tattoo the origin of mythos and story on my body. So really, I spend time taking narrative inspiration and weaving it into my skin. That's how I consider the importance of life.
Full back
Not
piece as
yet.
well.
Not yet. I was told I can't
And are
take my
these all
shirt off
done
on the
local? Is
podcast.
the ink all local from where you visited?
So yeah, I mean, mainly it's all local. Actually, this is a sleeve I call the Hero's Journey, which has where I'm from in Buffalo and a list of all places I've spent like serious time and traveled to on my arm. So I try to weave and live my experiences.
That's righteous, brother.
Hey man,
Nothing
thank
short of
you. This
amazing.
has been great. I appreciate you having me on, Miles.